Heading down south, we're going to have a look at the Jacksonville Jaguars now. Snuck into the playoffs, a far better season than last year under Urban Meyer. We saw shoots of potential, what this offense could be. A lot of that, Tom, was off the back of Trevor Lawrence. Do you think that he has now established himself as a reliable fantasy starter?
I think so, and I think they're going to be very fashionable in 2023, and you can extend that to all the Jaguars. But like the hype just died off Trevor Lawrence so much last summer. It seemed obvious that his situation was going to improve with a competent coaching upgrade. But like you see here, weeks 12 to 17, he was the QB5 with 20.7 points per game, 33.7 fantasy points over expected, which was the second most, and he had the third best passing EPA over that period. So, like, this was a really solid season for him. He had 7 weeks where he was a top 6 option. And I mean, if that's not good enough for you when you've not spent real elite money on a quarterback, then I don't know what is. I mean, last year there was probably a period where you could get him for 2 first-round picks, but there's no way that's going to happen now. I think in best ball in 2023, we'll be looking around that kind of round 7 to 8 tier break. And I'll be completely fine with paying that. I think they're going to be a team who might have a little bit of a struggle when they face a first-place schedule next year. They'll face a lot more tougher games. But, you know, they did plenty of damage against good teams this year, and I'll be right back in on him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me in Dynasty, he's established himself in that second tier of quarterbacks. I think, you know, Mahomes, Allen, Hurts are kind of in a tier of their own, but you can throw a blanket over Lamar, Justin Herbert, Justin Fields, all of those kind of guys. I think Trevor Lawrence absolutely belongs in that tier when you're looking at the production he had down the stretch this year, but also the age and the potential. And let's be honest, the weapons he's getting in. Obviously, there was a very interesting trade in the middle of the season where they went out and spent what we think is probably a second-round pick, but could end up being anything from a second to a fifth for Calvin Ridley. Do you think that he's going to come into this offense and help it take to a kind of another step?
I think the great thing for the Jags is that they probably don't need him to still be good. I mean, we saw it this year. Christian Kirk was drafted as the wide receiver 40 in best ball, finished as the wide receiver 22. Zay Jones, wide receiver 80, and finished as the wide receiver 31. So they've got good weapons. Evan Ingram had a great year as well. So if they can re-sign Evan Ingram, they can find a couple more depth pieces. Then even if Calvin Ridley struggles coming off what's been a long gap without playing, then they can survive. I mean, I'm really high on the weapons they do have. I mean, Christian Kirk had 8 weeks inside the top 24, 20 red zone targets, which were the 7th most at wide receiver. Zay Jones had 4 top 10 weeks, which I don't think anyone saw coming. He was a real league winner at points if you'd picked him up off the waiver wire. So these weapons have set them up in such a good way that it's going to be hard not to overdraft the Jaguars next year.
Do you think that, we're talking about obviously Trevor Lawrence, we're looking at stacking potentially in best ball. You're talking about Calvin Ridley, Zay Jones, Christian Kirk. If they re-sign Evan Ingram, that's before they draft anyone or go out and spend any free agent money. Do you think that because there's so many mouths to feed, it could dilute that potential stacking options in best ball?
Definitely. And I think that'll be quite a conundrum for sort of redraft and for Dynasty where you're having to choose which player to start. In best ball, I think because we've seen these options be good, they won't get too out of hand in terms of where their values are. So it should subdue them enough where if you can hit on, say, around 5, 6, 8 stack with 3 of those pieces, then you don't need them to go off absolutely every week because you'll have constructed your roster around the idea that not every one of them's starting. So I definitely think it's okay, but in redraft, yeah, particularly when you consider like Zay Jones has been brilliant and seems to have a real connection with Trevor Lawrence, but he feels like the most obvious candidate to lose snaps to Calvin Ridley.
Yeah, I think it should hopefully settle into a nice 3-headed kind of monster. You've got a traditional Z in Calvin Ridley. You've got your prototypical X. Okay, not quite as good as you'd like in next receiver in Zay Jones. Then you've got your slot and Christian Kirk. So it should hopefully be that all three can sit in and settle nicely. Looking across to the running back position, we've got Travis Etienne. Blew up in dynasty value this year. At times was being talked about as the overall RB1. I think he's probably going to settle in as a top 5, 6 running back this offseason in dynasty terms. Are you all in on Travis Etienne? Do you think he could be that elite running back that we're building rosters around?
I'm not quite sure yet, and I'm a little apprehensive about how I view him going into 2023 best ball. You know, down the stretch, he had an absolute monster workload at times. He had 4 top 12 finishes this season, but he only had 2 games all year with more than 3 targets. And the book on Travis Etienne coming out was that he was a really good receiving back, and what we're not seeing is him being utilized really heavily in that area. I mean, okay, so if you can average 3 targets a game, you're going to end up with about 50 on the year. But what we want to see is those spike weeks where you see 5, 6, and he really becomes Trevor Lawrence's security blanket in the way that, you know, guys like Austin Eckler and Christian McCaffrey are. He had 93 rushing attempts from week 10 onwards, which is a really good volume, but he only picked up first downs on like 1 in 5 of those attempts. So it felt a bit like at times he was getting there on sheer volume over complete talent. And I appreciate some people are going to call me a hater, but it just felt like I would have liked to have seen a little bit more. But I do think going into the playoffs that we could see a big weekend from him against the Chargers. And if that happens, then it'll definitely send his value going even higher into the offseason.